Hello, I have emerged from a non-stop multi-day session of binging No Rest for the Wicked. I can't say I made it out unscathed, but I am still alive, and I had a pretty good time. This is the brand new grim-dark isometric ARPG from Ori developer Moon Studios. They've got pretty high hopes for the game and aren't shy about their ambitions. Right on the top line description, it says, No Rest for the Wicked is a visceral precision action RPG set to reinvent the genre. Now, time will tell if they meet their lofty genre-defining goals, but they've definitely delivered something interesting here. I really enjoyed my first look at the game a few months ago and have since then been looking forward to playing once again. And well, I've certainly played a lot of the game, sinking an unhealthy amount of hours over these past few days. So Moon Studios did reach out asking to sponsor this video, but they were pretty clear that they just wanted me to do my normal thing, discussing the game, warts and all. So as usual, that is the plan. We are going to do a general overview of the game, covering the content, features, systems, and endgame. I'll go over my likes and dislikes, discuss some of the early issues and pain points of the early access release, as well as the developers' response to those and their upcoming plans through a roadmap. So for starters, what is No Rest for the Wicked? Well, let's get the elephant in the room out of the way. Yes, this is called an ARPG. No, it's absolutely nothing like Diablo, Path of Exile, Last Epoch, or the like. While ARPG is for many associated with those fast-paced hack-and-slash loot-raining dungeon crawlers, the term obviously extends beyond that. After all, ARPG does stand for action role-playing game, which makes up many different kinds of games. That said though, between the top-down isometric perspective and the developer calling this an ARPG, you would be excused for initially thinking it was going to play like other isometric ARPGs, but again, it absolutely does not. As you may have heard by now, this is way more Souls-like than it is Diablo-like in a lot of ways. Combat is straight out of the Souls playbook with all of the expected tools. There are over 100 weapons, each with their own movesets, light and heavy attacks, combo chains, along with special rune skills. Defense includes blocking, parries, and dodging. There's the entire suite of contextual attacks. Combat is also quite difficult, or it can be, with enemies capable of killing you in just a few hits, punishing any mistakes you make, such as overcommitting, running out of stamina, or missing a parry. Some of the more difficult enemies even have attacks that amount to one-shots, where if not avoided, you're probably dead. But at the same time though, like any good Souls-like, while it can be hard, it also highly rewards good play. With proper timing, avoiding incoming attacks, and then striking when enemies are in recovery, you can almost entirely avoid being hit altogether. It's like a dance, sort of a back and forth between you and the enemy. You watch, avoid the damage, and then strike. The more you play, the more you'll learn how each enemy works, to the point where eventually you can predict exactly what they're going to do next. And beyond good play, the game is also made easier thanks to its progression systems, which again is also very Souls-like. Every single weapon in the game scales with one or more particular attributes, which are boosted by spending stat points you get every time you level up. You can also upgrade your gear, moving through the tiers from 1 to 3, which makes it all progressively better. Upgrading your weapons and upgrading your gear ultimately makes the game all that easier, to the point of eventually making much of the content almost trivial once you get to a certain power level. And you do all of this upgrading by spending a resource at the blacksmith, including what are called armor and weapon shards. Sounds very, very familiar. The game has equipment loads as well, so based on how heavy your gear is, it'll put you into one of 3 categories, light, normal, or heavy, which impacts your movement speed along with the distance and speed of your dodge. The other thing that is very Souls-like is the level and world design. Outside of its darker theme, the way they build the world reminds me a ton of Dark Souls or of many Zelda games before Souls existed. The play space in No Rest for the Wicked consists of these thoughtfully handcrafted static levels with this interwoven design, lots of connecting paths, exits, and alternate routes into and out of every location. Things like locked doors that require you to find the keys, ladders that you can't climb until they're kicked down from above, or bridges you can't cross until you find your way around and lower them. Every single zone in the game is full of things just like this, where navigating the world becomes kind of like a discovery puzzle where, when solved, you open up shortcuts and alternate routes into and out of pretty much every location. And I gotta say, outside of the game's combat and its really chunky, heavy satisfying feel. I would say the world exploration and how the world is designed, that in my opinion is one of the best parts of this game. So all of that is the base foundation. You've got the Souls-like action combat in a world that is made up of many interconnected pieces. What is there though in terms of content, or the things that you'll be doing and the features you'll be engaging with while you play? Well, there's the main story questline, which takes you along the story, fighting enemies and moving through the handful of zones that are available in the game currently for this early access build. So after you play through the tutorial, you wash up on a beach, and this starting area consists of 3 sections. There is the shallows, which include the direct beachfront with its rocky shoreline, a few hidden areas, and an old watchtower. And then just beyond that is the keep, an abandoned castle with several sections to explore before heading further east into the glades, this woodlands area that completely surrounds and almost engulfs the 2 prior, going far above, below, and even behind both the shallows and the keep. So once you've explored the beginning area and you defeat the first boss, you're then introduced to the city of Sacrament. Going forward, this basically acts as a central hub for quest givers, vendors, crafting stations, and the few endgame systems available at the moment, which we will cover shortly. After arriving and exploring the city, the story then progresses and branches into 2 paths which you can tackle in whatever order. You can either head to the second major zone called the Nameless Path. This is a mountainous region and an old quarry located to the east, or you can venture into the sewers below the city, which acts as a 3rd zone full of several sections with puzzles to solve and a boss battle at the end. And then once you fully explore both of those regions, as well as spending more time in the first area, you'll be then asked to take on the final boss of the story, which moves you into what is effectively the current endgame. So right now, endgame and No Rest for the Wicked consist of the following. You'll do bounties and challenges while going back through the 3 zones to gather resources, fight enemies, and collect loot. You'll then take a lot of this stuff to upgrade your town and vendors. You'll engage with the player housing system. That's right. Might have not been expecting that. I wasn't, but the game does have player housing. And then you'll also run the Crucible Dungeon, which is like the pinnacle end game content at the moment. So bounties and challenges, you probably know what these are, but every single day you'll have a list of new tasks to complete, which will ask you to do things like eliminate a certain type of enemy in a particular region, find and defeat elites or these named enemies, collect and turn in certain resources, kill enemies using specific types of weapons, or craft items at particular vendors. Once complete, each bounty and challenge will reward you some currency along with some additional thing like resources, armor, weapons, recipes, or other items. And then besides the daily ones, there are even more rewarding weekly challenges and bounties that will be available to you as well. Next, you have got the town upgrade progression. So in the center of town is an NPC that lets you unlock several very important upgrades. And you'll want to get going right away because these upgrades allow you to level up various merchants, granting access to higher tier items, crafting, and refining stations. So the vendor merchants and crafter merchants include the following. There is a potion vendor who sells consumables that give you buffs as well as throwables. There's a tailor who sells cloth and leather goods. There is a traveling goods vendor which sells a rotating stock of assorted goods, various resources, items, gear, and recipes. There's a blacksmith. Here he sells heavy armor, melee weapons, and harvesting tools. He also lets you upgrade your gear, making more powerful versions of your armor and weapons. That right now the game has a base of tier 1 and goes all the way up to tier 3, and you can take a tier 1 item and through the upgrading at the blacksmith push it all the way up to a tier 3 item, which is the highest possible stats, the highest damage, the highest armor value, whatever. There's an enchanter who sells gems and runes. Gems are what you expect. You put them in your gear, they give you various bonuses, where runes are basically like spells and special attacks that you can slot into your weapons. Here you can also enchant your gear, which basically will take a basic white item and turn it into either a blue or purple rarity variation of it. So blue items will have 2 to 4 random affixes that give various bonuses of medium quality and strength, whereas the purple items have much stronger affixes, again 2 to 4, but they also include one significant drawback that can be like increasing your encumbrance, making you take increased damage, reducing your health, reducing your stamina, making you lose gold or experience. They're very strong items, but they come with a drawback, but some drawbacks aren't as bad as others. And so part of the process of this game is looking for purples that have really good bonuses and drawbacks that aren't so bad. Like, for example, when you're max character level, the drawbacks that have you lose XP don't matter because you can't revert backwards. So once you get to level 30, purple gear with losing XP on death or losing XP on hit all of a sudden isn't even that bad because you don't lose XP. Other vendors include a lumberer who sells housing items like storage and vanity items, as well as wood gear and tools such as bows and fishing rods. There is a cook who lets you cook higher quality foods and sells basic food resources as well as recipes. And there is an innkeeper. You can rest at the inn to restore health at any point. So all of these NPCs, once you unlock them, and some of them have to be unlocked by completing a side quest, but once you have the NPC in your town, they start at tier 1 and you need to upgrade them to tier 3 to get access to the highest quality materials, to the highest potential items that you can craft, to the most amount of the stations at the vendor. You want to upgrade from 1 to 3. You do this at a particular vendor, and this is part of the progression once you reach the end game, once you finish the story. And then aside from upgrading those merchants, you can also unlock traversal upgrades, installing a staircase, a ladder, and a lift at key points in the city that help you get around it much faster. Then there is the player housing. After you defeat the sewer boss, you unlock player housing. There's a handful of homes in town that become available for purchase for a relatively small fee. I think I paid like 30 silver for mine. When you do that, you gain access to a house. Here, you can place down any of the game's major crafting stations like the workbench, the furnace, the anvil, basically any of the crafting and refining stations that are found at their respective crafting NPCs can also be placed directly inside of your home. You can also place vanity items like chairs, tables, and lights. They're just nice to look at. But the biggest thing that you can do is place down storage containers, and this is huge because there's a house that you can buy in the center of town, and you can put as many storage containers as you want, and you're going to need them because this game has you collecting a ton of resources, a ton of consumables, and a ton of gear, of armor and weapons. So you need the storage space, and your house basically lets you keep all the stuff that you want to keep. And then the final endgame activity, and really the pinnacle one, is what is known as the Crucible. This is a dungeon, more or less. It's like the final endgame activity, the one thing you're really going to focus on. Now, you're going to be doing the other stuff. You're going to be going back through the game's 3 primary zones to fight enemies and harvest resources. At the very same time, you'll be completing bounties and challenges and then turning those in for rewards, and you'll use those resources to upgrade your town and your vendors and to craft stuff at the various crafting stations and NPCs, and you'll also spend time engaging with the player housing, making your inside of the house look the way you want, putting your storage chest, managing your inventory. But the end game grind, as it is, when it comes to the grind to reach max character level and the gear grind, the one thing, if any, that this has with like the ARPGs of the hack and slash dungeon crawl loot variety, the Diablos, the Path of Exiles, this game has randomly generated loot with a random assortment of stats with different rarities that you can get, and you're going to be hunting for the best possible combination depending on the build that you're going for and your playstyle. And you're mostly going to be doing this, besides crafting and at the enchanter, most of the gear that you're getting and the currencies and the resources that you need, most of that's going to be coming from farming the Crucible Dungeon. So the Crucible Dungeon is a series of rooms that are full of enemies that you fight your way through, eventually getting to a final boss. It is much harder than any of the Overland content. By the time you reach the Crucible, the Overland content will start to become relatively easy. Even what were previously challenging enemies become pretty simple as you power up. And inside of the Crucible is where you find almost elite quality characters. They are very powerful melee and casters, and the final boss is the most difficult fight that is currently in the game at the moment. So the rooms themselves are actually always the same. There are an assortment, I think there's 8 to 10 total rooms, and they are identical every time. The layout, the look, and the structure of each of these, let's just say 10, of each of these 10 rooms is identical every single time. Nothing about them changes. The order of the rooms change, but you go through those exact same rooms, those exact same spaces every time you run the Crucible. They'll just rearrange which rooms you see in what order. So sometimes the first room you walk into might be a middle or last room in your next Crucible run, but it is the same. Again, I want to say 8 to 10 rooms every single time. The rooms, their layout, their structure, their look, they are identical. But the enemies inside will vary, at least some of them. The quantity and the type of enemies in these rooms can change from run to run, but there are also some that stay the same. So for example, this fire mage is always on this ledge every run. Every single time I come come to this room while running the Crucible, this fire mage is always here without fail. And there's a few other examples of particular enemies that are always in one particular location in each of these rooms, but then there's also a smattering of random enemies placed throughout the rooms as well. They will cycle, what type of enemy, where they are, everything like that. So after going through all of the rooms in whichever order combination you got, you then enter the final boss arena, and defeating that boss gives you some really nice rewards, just a ton of really great stuff. In fact, in general, just doing Crucible flat out is massively rewarding. You get tons of weapons, tons of armor, consumables, resources, and gold. This is definitely the most productive use of your time when it comes to grinding and trying to gear up and level up. The only limiting factor is the fact that every run of Crucible requires you to spend one fallen ember, which basically is a key to access that content. Now, you'll find plenty of these as you do everything else in the game. You kill enemies, you loot chests, you harvest resources, you'll find fallen embers. That is like an overview of all of the content, the different things to do. How much game is there? Well, all told, I have spent well over 60 hours thus far, and likely that there will be more time clocked in by the time you watch this video, playing from the very start when I made my first character to reaching the end game, which I would define as defeating the last main story boss and then unlocking the Crucible dungeon along with the player housing. That process took me like 15 to 20-ish hours or so, and then I hit max character level a few hours later from grinding the Crucible primarily is how I got the most XP. And then after that, I have spent the remainder of my time playing the game because there's a big gap between me reaching max level and then the time I put in thus far. What else have I been doing? Well, I've been running Crucible over and over. Again, I'm farming resources and gear. I'm trying to min-max my gear and upgrade that gear. I'm working towards a build. I'm trying different gear setups, trying different weapons, but only weapons that are usable based on the stats that I've picked because there is no respecking in this game. So if you're going to strength build, you are a strength build on that character unless they change this in the future. Also, what I've been doing is unlocking all my inventory slots. You do this by defeating bosses and completing certain quests that reward Ichor. That Ichor turns into unlocks for inventory slots, for weapon slots. I've also, like I mentioned, been upgrading my town, all of the vendor stations, getting them to tier 3, upgrading all of the traversal upgrades, that stair, ladder, and the lift. And yes, going over again and making a new character so that I can try a different build and playstyle because you really can't that much with one character once you have committed to a build to a specific stat setup. Now that said, while I'm here sitting with 60 hours going through what I just told you, the amount of time that you might get out of this game can vary wildly. It is going to change from player to player big time, depending on your skill level, how quickly you rush, your focus while playing, and just how you play in general. So for example, going through my first run, I spent about 2.5 to 3 hours just in the starting zone, that area which included the beachfront, the keep, and the glades. In that time, I went around exploring, checking out every nook and cranny, trying to unlock all of the paths by kicking down the ladders and lowering the bridges. I killed every enemy, I harvested all the resource nodes, and I opened every single loot chest that I could find. I wanted to make sure I saw and I covered everything when I started playing. I was playing the game. I wanted to enjoy and explore and fully experience it. I wasn't in a rush. I just wanted to go around and see everything I could see. And like I said, yes, that took about 2.5 to 3 hours just in that first zone before I even got to the first boss. However, on the flip side, you could make a fresh character, then after the tutorial, literally run to the first boss and attempt that fight in under 10 minutes. No exaggeration. From the starting beach, you can literally sprint right up into the keep, run and grab the storage key, rescue the blacksmith, unlock the gate, run past the glades, and you could be at the first boss encounter in under 10 minutes. I think you could be there in like 5 minutes. I'm like serious. Literally. It would be very difficult. You wouldn't have any equipment or gear unless you happen to pick some stuff up along the way, killing a couple enemies, opening a chest, whatever. But you could, in what took me 2 to 3 hours, you could be at that first boss fight in 10 minutes. So 10 minutes, 2 to 3 hours. It's really up to you, basically. So while I spent those 3 hours fully exploring the area of that first zone, fighting and looting along the way and trying to do and see everything, yes, you could be there in 10 minutes. It's that sort of a game. Challenge and speedrunning is 1000% going to be a thing. The game is designed in order to make all of that possible, and I suspect you're going to see that in the coming weeks and months. So again, while I may have 60 hours, some people could easily be just done with the game in 15. It really just depends on how you play. And I wasn't like wasting time staring at paintings on the walls. I was exploring. I was trying to do everything. But yeah, if you want to go fast, you can absolutely go very, very fast. So that's the systems, that's the features, that's the content in this game. Let's talk about my likes and the feedback. What I like is pretty straightforward and pretty simple. I love the game's combat, I love the world exploration, and I love the character. And I'm not talking about the individual characters, but I'm also talking about the individual characters. There's just so much personality in the world, in the NPCs, in the enemies, in the environment. Everything about this game just oozes a very distinct vibe and feel, and I've really, really enjoyed it. The combat is definitely one of the highlights. I just think it feels so incredibly well done. Even some of the bigger detractors of the game so far have been happily, freely admitting that the combat is very well executed. It's just a fantastic iteration of a Souls-like, and I can just gush for days and days about how fun it is to explore the world. The way they've designed the world and the verticality of this thing is insane. There are just so many ladders and elevators and ledges to jump off of. For an isometric game, again, I'll say it's just really, really, really well done. And then also, just across the board, the game feels incredibly well made. Everything from the combat to the traversal, the world design, the characters, even harvesting resources, all looks and feels really good. What I like is pretty simple. I just tell you what it is and I say that I like it, and I do. It feels good, it looks good, all those things I really enjoy. But there are definitely quite a few points of feedback, and we're going to mention that now as well. Performance. This should be the #1 priority. They have said that it's going to be, but I'm just going to add my voice to the chorus here. They need to get the game running smooth, because nothing ruins a play experience more than having poor performance, even on high to mid to high NPCs. We're running into issues those first few days. Now, as a reminder, or if you don't know, I am personally using a 3080 Ti. I've got an i7 processor. I've got the game installed on an SSD. I've got 64 gigs of RAM. It was smooth 80 to 90% of the time, but got really, really bad in certain areas, like the area just before the first boss, and a few parts of the second zone, that nameless path area, were both particularly noticeable with regular frame drops in those spots. Now, they've already released 2 hotfixes, both of which included some performance updates, and they do seem to have made a difference, but regardless, get the game running completely smooth as soon as possible. That's feedback #1. Point #2 of feedback is the inventory management. It's just a bit of a mess. You are going to spend a lot of time managing your inventory. Even with just the sheer amount of weapons, gear, and consumables you get, you're kept busy enchanting commons into blue and purple gear, comparing those items to what you've equipped, selling what you don't want, equipping what you do, and then putting any of your backups or things that you might want to use later on another character into storage. But then on top of that, there are a ton of consumables, many different forms of health food, buff food, temporary buff potions, weapon enhancing items, and throwables. And even that is a lot to manage, but if that wasn't enough, you have got what feels like an endless amount of raw resources that are used for crafting, potion making, and cooking. And my god, is there a lot here. There are 3 different tiers of most every single resource type in the game. So 3 variations of wood, ore, coal, meat, fish, organs, fruit, veggies, herbs, skulls, bones, animal heads, animal claws, leather, fabric, all of that, everything that I just listed times 3. 3 tiers of everything on that list. That is a lot of resources to shuffle around your inventory, moving it around, putting it in storage, pulling it back out when you want to craft something. It's just a ridiculous amount, and it becomes what feels like way too much of your time spent fiddling around with your inventory. Honestly, they could take half of this stuff and put it in like a currencies tab, and there would still be a lot there. They should definitely do something to make all of this more manageable, because as is, every like 15 to 20 minutes, I'm basically coming back to town needing to dump things from my inventory into my 17 various storage chests. No exaggeration, I actually have 17 storage chests for all of this, for all of the resources, for the consumables, for the different crafting things, the leathers, the fabrics, all the food stuff, all of the actual consumables, all of the ores, all of the wood, all of the crafting upgrade materials, which are separate from the other resources. There's just so much in there. There's so much. Streamline it if you can. Add a currencies tab and dump some of this stuff in there. I don't care. Divvy it up however you want, but it's so much to manually, one at a time, move back and forth. Your inventory fills up. I go to my house. I go through my 17 storage chests, filtering stuff into there, putting them in their different categories. And then when I want to craft something, they don't pull from storage. So I'm going back to the house, opening the storage chest, putting it back in my inventory, going to the thing, crafting, and then if I got anything else, like I crafted something good, but I don't want to equip it right now because it's like a backup for an alt character, then I'm going back to my house and putting another thing back in my storage. It's just a lot, and I think they can really streamline this. It's inventory management is fine. It's a part of this game. It creates downtime. It breaks up the pacing. It makes it so you're not doing 100% combat as much as I would love to do that. It's good to break up the pacing, especially for longer gaming sessions. As it is right now, way too much inventory management, way too many things to filter through and shuffle back and forth constantly, plus no pulling from storage really puts the cherry on top. So they definitely need to address this, in my personal opinion. A couple of things they could really add that would be great is add a merge from inventory to stash. So if I have a stash container that has all of my herbs and fruits and veggies in there, I open up that stash container, give me one click to take everything from my inventory that matches what's in that container and filter it up and move it over automatically, so I don't have to manually do each one every single time. Also, there is auto sort options with various filters for your character inventory, but not one for storage and stash space. There should be sorting for those as well. That would help inventory management a lot. Another point of feedback is the replayability. So right now, it's pretty basic. You've got the open world activities. You're going to go out farming resources, killing enemies, collecting loot, getting currencies, getting things to run the crucible, and then doing those bounties. That is enjoyable, but I don't know, a week or 2 weeks from now, how much fun that's going to be. Crucible right now is like the replayable content, but as I mentioned, the rooms are always the same. We've got those 10 or so rooms with the same layout. Nothing about them changes except for the placement of some of the enemies, and you're fighting the same boss every single time. It is just the first phase of early access. We do know more is coming. Even at the Crucible, there are different pillars, and you can see there's clearly extensions to the Crucible that are coming beyond what is currently there. But let me just tell you this. I want to tell you about a fever dream that I had, or a hallucination that I had when I first entered the Crucible. The first time I entered this, knowing that it was said to be a repeatable endgame activity, my immediate assumption was that it was going to be an endless string of combat arenas. So these 10 or so rooms, I thought there was just going to continuously be more of them. They were going to take their wonderfully handcrafted world and design and environmental detail, and they were going to make like 100 different rooms or something, or use some procedural generation algorithm to make these small arenas that you just kept going through, with the enemies and the encounters getting increasingly difficult, and to the point where it almost got impossible. But no, there's, like I said, 10 rooms, the same 10 rooms over and over and over again, and it wasn't exactly like the hallucination that I had. And I'm not saying they have to make the end game that content, and I'm also aware that we're not actually at the end game because it's only the first act, and there's certainly more to come when they finish the game and it leaves early access. But I'm just spitballing and throwing out some ideas here. Speaking of which, for a Souls-like and or for an ARPG, feels very boss light at the moment. Right now, there's only a handful of actual boss fights in the game. By my count, I want to say it's 5 or 6 actual boss encounters. There should be way more for any ARPG, for any Souls-like, and sort of like the other endgame discussion, this is also likely coming because we do only have the first act at the moment. We're assuming there's at least going to be 3 acts. We're looking like 15, 18 to 20 bosses. If they go 4 or 5 acts, that's even more. So it'll be better once the game is finished, but just a note on where it is at the moment. A couple of quality of life suggestions, I guess. One, equipment comparison. This is absolutely necessary. I just, especially playing on a gamepad, constantly just going back and forth between a new item I'm looking at and what I've got equipped, having to remember the stats as I look back and forth or check out multiple things. Just give me an option to, when I'm hovered over a new chest piece, compare it to my current chest piece side by side. Craft from storage, make it a town upgrade if you want, but I should absolutely be able to go to a crafting station and pull items from my 17 storage chest instead of having to do the run back and forth every time. Also, in general, I think it'd be good if they unlocked player housing earlier than they do. I didn't get to it until after about 20 hours. Having it even at hour 10 would have been a huge quality of life boost in general. So there have been some launch issues, and we're certainly going to address those. The game's release was a bit of a mess. As of this recording right now, there's over 10,000 Steam reviews, and it's got a mixed rating. It's 65% positive, 35% negative. Now, it has been steadily climbing since launch when it came out on Thursday and early into Friday. Those first 24 hours, the rating was sitting at about 50-50, with some of the most common early complaints and criticisms being the following: the game's poor performance, the difficulty of the combat and enemy encounters, the durability, basically items constantly breaking, especially gathering tools, inventory management, and there was a handful of complaints that it wasn't like Diablo or Path of Exile, which again, I don't blame them. It's an isometric game. They call it an ARPG. At first glance, I get why some people assumed that, even though that's not what it is. But anyways, those are some of the bigger complaints that we've had, and that's why part of the reason why the game is currently sitting on a mixed rating. Now, part of the reason why I think it's been steadily climbing, and I'm going to assume will continue to climb, first of all, it's just outside of those issues, I think it's an actual good game. Like, the core of the game is really good. Everything that I mentioned about the positives is really bang on. Like, they really nailed the combat, they nailed the atmosphere, the look of the game. It's all very good. But many of those complaints that we've seen about the performance, the difficulty, the durability issues, the inventory management, those are all valid and accurate. Like, those are real issues, but they've been addressing them super swiftly. So on Friday, the day after launch, they released their first hotfix, and this addressed some of those early pressing issues. They reduced the durability damage taken as well as repair cost and increased the drop rate on repair powers, effectively addressing the complaint that people had that they had stuff constantly breaking. They also made combat a little smoother by reducing stamina cost for attacks. They reduced the fall damage curve, as a lot of people were dying to fall damage from what seemed like survivable heights. They reduced the cost for horseshoe crab and food that includes the horseshoe crab, basically making crafting food, the healing portion of the combat encounter, more affordable and letting you heal more frequently. They fixed some crash issues that were occurring, and they also fixed some jumping puzzles in the potion seller cave, which, if you missed the live stream, I missed that jump, I think, 10 times before I finally figured it out. It was one of the few platforming sections that was incredibly tilting and frustrating in this game. Most of the platforming seems to go by without a hitch, but that one had me losing my mind, and that's hilarious that the day after they actually patched it to make it better. And then a day later, they released another hotfix. So hotfix number 2, 3 days after release, this hotfix improved performance and optimization across the board. This was pretty significant. I saw noticeable improvements after that. So really, really good. And they need to continue to do this to make performance as smooth as possible everywhere throughout the entire play experience for as many people as possible. They also increased the durability on all tiers of tools, meaning more time you could use them before they break. They improved drops of clay. This was super important because it was used for tier 2 to tier 3 upgrades. However, by the time you got to that tier, clay was actually not dropping in the overworld, so you had to make new realms and farm clay from the early game. It was very strange. I'm glad they fixed it, in addition to a ton of bug fixes. These two major patches addressing a lot of issues and fixing some big problems, like improving performance pretty dramatically just a couple of days after release. Love to see it. Now, No Rest for the Wicked is in early access. They're launching with only that first chapter, but like I said, I've gotten already 60 hours out of that time. On the docket for future planned updates, the first big update is going to be for multiplayer. I'm presuming here they will be adding co-op and or PvP. Update number 2 looks like a content update. They are adding an area called The Breach, and then they've got more plans. There's going to be additional content updates, additional features and mechanics, additional zones as they continue to add the new acts and progress and finish the game into the eventual 1.0 release. So there you go. Hopefully that gives you a nice overview of No Rest for the Wicked, all of its content, features, and my thoughts on the game, what I liked and what I think needs work and improvement. Overall, very promising start. I have loved playing. I didn't have to play 60 hours, but I did because I really enjoyed it that much. I could just gush for days about the combat, the exploration, the world. It's all fantastic, and I'm looking forward to seeing as the game progresses and expands throughout the course of early access. But that does it for this video. That does it for today. Thank you as always for watching. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see you guys next time.